Old Hollywood knew how to make stars, but it didn't know what to do with the monsters it helped create. Behind every iconic smile and spotlighted close-up was a trail of slammed dressing room doors, bruised egos, and whispered warnings from crew members who'd been burned before. These weren't just difficult personalities. They were legends with tempers, titans with sharp tongues, and icons who could turn a film set into a war zone with nothing more than a glance. This isn't about gossip. This is about power, pressure, and what happens when a golden age forgets to teach its golden children how to behave. By the end of this video, you'll know the 14 stars whose on-screen brilliance was rivaled only by their off-screen firestorms. And one name on this list, what they did on set still echoes through Hollywood like a warning. Joan Crawford, the Ice Queen of Hollywood. Behind the dazzling smile and razor-sharp cheekbones of Joan Crawford was a woman who ran her life, and everyone in it, like a studio backlit, tightly controlled, highly polished, and unforgiving to those who stepped out of line. Crawford's rise from poverty to Oscar-winning stardom was nothing short of mythic. She reinvented herself with grit and ambition, but that same iron will often harden into arrogance. Colleagues described her as a perfectionist with a cold streak, a woman who expected absolute discipline on set and demanded admiration off it. She was the kind of star who made directors nervous and assistants tremble. Her entrance onto a soundstage felt less like a coworker arriving and more like royalty descending. Everything had to be immaculate, not just her makeup, but the lighting, the angles, the air around her. Woe to the grip who left a coffee cup in the shot, or the actress who dared steal focus. Joan's interactions were precise, clipped, and emotionally distant. She didn't believe in small talk, she believed in power. And if you challenged her, even politely, you might find herself iced out, blacklisted, or publicly humiliated. Her famous feuds, especially with Bette Davis, weren't just personal squabbles. They were full-blown, decades-long wars waged with cutting remarks and strategic sabotage. While the public saw a glamorous screen goddess, insiders knew a different version, a woman so consumed with maintaining control that even kindness felt rehearsed. Crawford wasn't just difficult, she was, in many ways, unknowable. A marble statue wrapped in satin, too perfect to crack, too cold to touch. And this was only the beginning. Frank Sinatra, the charmer with a short fuse. Frank Sinatra didn't walk into a room, he took it. With that unmistakable voice and razor-sharp style, he could melt an audience in seconds. But behind the swing and swagger of OL Blue Eyes was a temper that could flip faster than a nightclub light switch. Sinatra was a man of extreme contrasts. He'd toast with the elite, then snap at a waiter for the wrong drink. He might tip a bellhop $100, then fire a band member over a missed note. To fans, he was magnetic. To insiders, he was a minefield. You never quite knew when you'd say the wrong thing or stand in the wrong place. He carried grudges like cufflinks and collected slights like records. A late arrival, a casual remark, a lukewarm review, any of it could send him into a tailspin. Stories of him throwing furniture, storming out of interviews, or belittling colleagues weren't rare, they were expected. And the more powerful he became, the less he cared about concealing it. Yet, people tolerated him. Why? Because when Sinatra liked you, life was good. You were in his circle, under his protection. But when he didn't, let's just say even Hollywood royalty didn't want to cross Frank. Directors treaded lightly. Studio heads negotiated with caution. And journalists? One wrong word, and they'd never get near him again. He had the charisma of a king and the unpredictability of a street brawler. One minute you were clinking glasses, the next you were ducking flying cutlery. Frank Sinatra wasn't just a singer, he was a storm in a tuxedo. Marlon Brando, the rebel who rewrote the rules, then broke them. Marlon Brando arrived in Hollywood like a thunderclap. With every mumble, every stare, every slouch, he dismantled the polished facade of studio-era acting and replaced it with something raw, unpredictable, and undeniably magnetic. Yet for all his brilliance on screen, working with him behind the scenes was a test of patience, endurance, and diplomacy. Directors quickly learned that Brando didn't follow instructions, he challenged them. He questioned motives, ignored blocking, and often refused to say his lines as written, claiming he didn't believe in them. His defiance wasn't loud or theatrical, it was deliberate and unnerving, the quiet rebellion of a man who knew he was irreplaceable. Those around him were left navigating a maze of mood swings, delayed call times, and cryptic silences. He could hold up production for hours, offering no explanation other than a distant stare and a vague shrug. On some days, he refused to memorize lines, demanding cue cards be hidden around the set. On others, He would deliver a scene with such haunting realism that no one dared interrupt, even if the cameras had stopped rolling. Brando didn't care about the chain of command or studio schedules. He cared about control, about truth in performance, and about never giving more of himself than he was ready to. His indifference to Hollywood's rules was more than rebellion, it was a philosophy. He believed the industry was artificial, bloated, and often beneath him. And while his instincts often led to legendary performances, they also created a trail of frustrated co-stars, drained crews, and directors who vowed never to work with him again. But unlike most stars, Brando wasn't looking for admiration. He wanted freedom, and if that made him impossible, so be it. Bette Davis, the queen who played to win. Bette Davis didn't enter scenes, she seized them. With a stare that could stop a heartbeat and a voice that cut like glass, she wasn't just acting, she was laying claim. To the role, to the room, to the moment. She was not built for passivity or niceties, and anyone expecting sweetness quickly found themselves outmatched. Davis was a powerhouse, yes, but also a tactician. She knew what she wanted, and made no attempt to conceal how she intended to get it. From her earliest days under contract at Warner Brothers, she pushed back, on scripts, on co-stars, on directors. If a line fell false, she changed it. If a shot was unflattering, she fought to reshoot. She once walked off a major production rather than play a part she considered beneath her, and sued the studio when they tried to stop her from working elsewhere. For most, that would have ended a career. For Davis, it cemented her legend. Her notorious feud with Joan Crawford wasn't just about personal dislike, it was a clash of titans. Davis fought with sharp words, calculated gestures, and an ice-cold command of her space. Crawford came with glamour, Davis came with weapons-grade presence. Co-stars, male and female alike, found her intimidating. She demanded equality, attention, and respect in a time when Hollywood wasn't built to offer any of the three to women, especially women who wouldn't smile on command. On set, she could be relentless, even hostile. She believed the work was sacred, and that mediocrity was an insult to the craft. That conviction often came at a cost. People described her as difficult, temperamental, even cruel. But Davis never flinched from the accusations. She didn't want to be liked. She wanted to be unforgettable. And she was. Up next is a star whose troubles were less about control and more about collapse. A voice as golden as her heart, crumbling under pressure no one saw coming. Judy Garland, the voice that echoed through a cage. Judy Garland lived in a world that adored her and devoured her at the same time. On screen, she radiated warmth, innocence, and magic, a girl who could make rainbows seem real. But when the camera stopped, what remained was a woman worn down by the very machine that built her. Garland didn't simply have bad manners in the traditional sense. She had storms swirling just beneath the surface, and those who worked with her were often caught in the downpour. Studios discovered her talent early and quickly put her to work. Long hours, tight diets, endless rehearsals. She was treated not like an artist, but like a product with a shelf life. That pressure followed her into adulthood. By the time she was leading box office musicals, her joy had been replaced by fear. She second-guessed every move, every note, every glance. She could be late to set or miss an entire day, leaving cast and crew waiting. Directors tried patience. Producers tried discipline. Nothing seemed to fix what was never broken by her in the first place. Those who acted alongside her often described the experience as walking a tightrope. One day, she'd be vibrant, present, and luminous. The next, she'd disappear into herself, unsure whether she belonged there at all. Conversations could veer from warm and witty to sharp and defensive without warning. It wasn't arrogance, it was survival. Garland, at her core, was a woman desperately trying to live up to a legend that kept rewriting itself. Behind the smile was someone exhausted by applause. Her difficulties weren't born of ego, but of damage, rehearsed over a lifetime. In the end, her greatest performances came at a cost no audience would ever see. But the next name on our list wasn't fragile, he was ferocious. A brilliant mind wrapped in a voice that didn't ask for attention, it commanded it. Orson Welles, the genius who couldn't be directed. Orson Welles entered Hollywood not as a newcomer, but as a force of nature. With Citizen Kane, he didn't just make a film, he detonated the foundation of what cinema could be. But with that brilliance came a level of self-regard and resistance that turned every project into a battle, and every collaboration into a test of will. Welles was not interested in compromise. He didn't listen, he declared. He spoke in absolutes, dismissing opinions that didn't match his own with theatrical disdain. Directors found themselves undermined. Producers were routinely outmaneuvered. Actors were expected to bend to his vision or be cast aside like stage props. He saw filmmaking as conquest and those around him as either tools or obstacles. While many stars arrived late to set out of carelessness or ego, Wells did it as an event. When he entered, the air changed. He demanded silence before speaking, and once he began, it was hard to remember anyone else was in the room. His intellect was immense, his creativity limitless, but his disregard for structure, both social and professional, left a trail of chaos. Schedules collapsed under the weight of his improvisations. Budgets swelled beyond control. More than one project imploded not from lack of talent, but from Wells's refusal to share the spotlight or follow the rules. He could be warm, witty, and intoxicating in conversation, but only when he felt like it. Those who worked with him learned quickly that loyalty meant submission and collaboration meant obedience. Wells didn't act within a system. He believed he was the system. And if Hollywood didn't agree, he simply moved on, convinced the world would catch up. Next on our list is a woman who didn't demand the stage. She owned it with a glance. But behind the sparkle and silk was a storm that never quite cleared. Ava Gardner, the star who burned her own script. Ava Gardner was a walking contradiction. Impossibly glamorous, effortlessly magnetic, and yet completely uninterested in playing by Hollywood's rules. She had the kind of beauty that made people forget their place, but she never let that beauty define her. Gardner didn't just push boundaries, she laughed at the idea they ever existed. Directors admired her presence, but feared her unpredictability. Co-stars were enchanted until they found themselves caught in the undertow of her sharp tongue and shorter patience. She arrived on set with a sense of casual rebellion, often late, sometimes aloof, and always unapologetic. When she was focused, she delivered moments of pure cinematic magic. When she wasn't, there was no coaxing her into cooperation. She drank, she vanished, she argued, not out of spite, but out of boredom with anything that smelled of control. Ava Gardner never cared for authority, and she had no interest in pretending otherwise. Her disregard for Hollywood decorum wasn't a phase, it was her philosophy. She once described herself as someone who didn't belong in polite society, and few who worked with her would disagree. She was infamous for saying exactly what she thought, even when silence would have served her better. She could charm a room with a smile, then demolish it with a single remark. Assistants quit. Directors gave up. Publicists struggled to contain the aftermath of her nights out, nights that were often louder than the films she starred in. Yet despite the chaos, few could take their eyes off her. Ava Gardner didn't care whether she was loved or loathed. She cared only for freedom, and she fought for it with a ferocity that left others breathless. But our next name didn't rage against Hollywood. He dissected it, one cutting line at a time. Tallulah Bankhead, the hurricane in heels. Tallulah Bankhead didn't walk into a room. She erupted into it. Volcanic, magnetic, and completely unfiltered, she treated life like a stage and every conversation like a performance. There were no rehearsals, no script, just Tallulah, in all her outrageous glory, ready to detonate expectations. Directors feared her, castmates adored her from a distance, and assistants learned quickly to stay out of her path unless summoned, and even then, at their own risk. Her manners were not just bad, they were non-existent. She interrupted meetings, mocked authority, and made a habit of saying the exact thing everyone else was trying not to. What some called eccentricity was, in truth, pure combustion. She could be charming, devastatingly funny, and effortlessly captivating, and then pivot into cruelty without warning. Punctuality meant nothing to her. Protocol was a joke. She once showed up to a formal film rehearsal barefoot, holding a cigarette in one hand and a cocktail in the other, and proceeded to scold the director for being too uptight. Tallulah didn't care what was expected of her. She cared only about amusement. If that meant insulting a producer, so be it. If it meant walking off set mid-scene because she was bored, no apology would follow. She lived for the moment, for the chaos, for the reaction. There was a kind of brilliance in her lawlessness, but also destruction. She burned bridges with the same flair she used to deliver a monologue, loudly, proudly, and in front of an audience. No one ever forgot her. Most couldn't keep up with her, and many didn't want to try again. Next on our list is a man who didn't spark fires. He smirked as he stoked them, wearing charm-like armor, while trouble followed in his shadow. Laurence Olivier, the master who looked down from the stage. Laurence Olivier carried himself like a man carved out of Shakespearean marble, polished, precise, and utterly convinced of his own superiority. His talent was undeniable. His technique was legendary. And yet what lingered in his wake wasn't just admiration, but resentment, the quiet frustration of those who had stood beside him and been quietly dismissed, condescended to, or entirely ignored. Olivier viewed acting not as emotion, but as discipline, a technical exercise in control and transformation. He had little patience for spontaneity, and even less for actors who approached the craft through instinct rather than preparation. He famously clashed with method actors, dismissing their soul-searching processes as indulgent nonsense. When working with them, he didn't hide his contempt, he sharpened it into sarcasm. His brilliance wasn't warm or inviting, it was cold, almost clinical, like a master surgeon watching a field medic stumble through a procedure. Colleagues often found themselves on edge in his presence, afraid to miss a beat or flub a line. He expected excellence and rarely tolerated anything less, especially from those he considered beneath him, which, in truth, was almost everyone. Olivier wasn't known for tantrums or theatrics. His cruelty came dressed in velvet, subtle, precise, and devastating. A glance could dismiss a performance. A single, backhanded compliment could unravel a reputation. Even those who respected him found it difficult to love him. He treated film work as a necessity, not a passion, often mocking the medium that made him an international star. Hollywood, to him, was a vulgar machine. He endured it, but never embraced it, and his disdain often dripped from every word he spoke on set. Up next is a woman who didn't bother with disdain or diplomacy. She lit matches in rooms full of gasoline and smiled while the sparks flew. Errol Flynn, the rogue who lived like a legend. Errol Flynn didn't play heroes, he embodied them, or so the public believed. Cloaked in charisma and armed with a grin that disarmed even the most skeptical critics, he swung from chandeliers, seduced audiences, and carried entire films with the swagger of a man who knew the rules but never once intended to follow them. But behind the thrilling stunts and devil-may-care bravado was a man for whom boundaries were a punchline and responsibility, a burden left to others. Flynn lived in pursuit of sensation. Directors never knew which version of him would arrive on set, the dashing leading man ready to light up the screen, or the disheveled daredevil who hadn't slept, hadn't prepared, and hadn't bothered to tell anyone why. Crews were expected to adjust around his whims. Co-stars learned quickly that Flynn was either your greatest ally or a reckless saboteur, depending entirely on his mood or his hangover. He charmed his way out of trouble with alarming consistency, leaving a trail of broken contracts, infuriated producers, and damaged reputations. Yet, Hollywood kept calling. His box office appeal was undeniable, and for a time, the chaos was tolerated, even celebrated. But behind the scenes, the mood was far less forgiving. Assistants were mistreated, schedules obliterated, and professional obligations shrugged off as if they were mere annoyances. Flynn didn't see himself as part of system. He saw himself as the exception to every rule, a star whose brightness excused the darkness that came with it. He made bad manners look romantic, until they weren't. Next is a star whose battles weren't waged in public, but across dinner tables and red carpets, with a coldness only family could understand. Joan Fontaine, the smile with a razor behind it. Joan Fontaine never raised her voice, she didn't have to. Her silences spoke volumes, and her polite smile could chill a room faster than an insult ever could. Unlike other stars who left destruction in their wake through tantrums and scandal, Fontaine wielded control with precision. Her bad manners didn't explode, they unfolded slowly behind tightly drawn lips and eyes that missed nothing. She was graceful, refined, and often described as distant, but what simmered beneath that composure was a lifelong rivalry that bled into every corner of her career. Her feud with her sister, the equally famous Olivia de Havilland, is the stuff of Hollywood legend. While most siblings shared red carpets, Joan and Olivia shared cold shoulders and backhanded remarks delivered with the poise of a formal bow. Joan never hesitated to undermine her sister, both privately and in the press. At one award show, after winning an Oscar before Olivia did, Joan famously refused her sister's congratulations. It wasn't a scandal, it was a statement. On set, she kept her distance. Co-stars often felt she was judging them, and many claimed she did little to hide her disinterest unless the camera was rolling. She expected excellence from everyone around her, but offered little warmth in return. Her demands were rarely loud, but always final. She carried herself like a woman who had been wronged, and had taken careful note of every slight, whether real or imagined. Joan Fontaine didn't need drama to make her point. She made you feel it in the room. A cool wind, a pointed glance, a word left deliberately unsaid. And when she walked away, there was no mistaking it. You'd been dismissed. Next comes a star whose fame was fleeting, but whose temper flared like a matchstick, brilliant, loud, and gone just as fast. Clara Bow, the wild spark that couldn't be contained. Clara Bow wasn't just the first it girl. She was everything the Roaring Twenties wanted to be. Bold, unfiltered, untamed. She didn't act like a starlet. She acted like a fuse, lit, flickering, and always on the edge of blowing up. While audiences saw irresistible charm and magnetic vulnerability, those behind the scenes often saw something else. Unpredictability wrapped in silk and panic behind every punchline. She had no patience for pretenses. Raised in hardship and launched into fame at breakneck speed, Clara didn't come to Hollywood to play the game. She came to escape. And escape she did, from scripts she didn't like, directors she didn't respect, and any sense of structure that tried to fence her in. She was late. She was loud. She broke rules, missed call times, and challenged authority with the blunt honesty of someone who simply didn't know how to lie. Those who worked with her found her mercurial, radiant one day, unreachable the next. She'd burst onto set with a laugh that filled the room, then vanish behind her dressing room door for hours, unreachable and unwilling. There was no middle ground. You were either caught in her glow or left in the shadow of her retreat. Hollywood tried to refine her, to shape her into a polished product, but she never fit the mold. The more they pushed, the more she resisted, sometimes recklessly, sometimes cruelly. She left directors fuming, co-stars confused, and producers second-guessing their decisions. But no one could look away. Clara Bow wasn't difficult in the traditional sense. She was raw, and the industry didn't know what to do with raw. But the next name wasn't raw or volatile. He was sharp, calculated, and carried his bad manners like a professional badge of honor. Walter Matthau, the grouch who grumbled his way to the top. Walter Matthau didn't bother with charm. He replaced it with a scowl, a muttered complaint, and a cigarette dangling from his lip. He wasn't explosive. He wasn't scandalous. But if you had the misfortune of working beside him on a bad day, which by most accounts was any day before lunch, you'd feel the full force of a man who treated pleasantries as if they were beneath him. He was brilliant, unquestionably. His comedic timing, his expressive face, and his natural ability to steal a scene without lifting a finger made him a fixture of American film. But with Matthau, there was a wall. A thick, sarcastic, unmoving wall of dry wit and impatient muttering that separated him from the Hollywood machinery he so clearly disdained. He didn't suffer fools, didn't tolerate inefficiency, and made little effort to hide his irritation with anyone who disrupted his rhythm, directors included. His behavior wasn't outwardly cruel, but it could be corrosive. Long silences, dismissive eye rolls, and barbed one-liners left co-stars second-guessing themselves. Newcomers were often met with cold indifference. Studio handlers quickly learned that trying to manage Matthau was like trying to schedule the weather. If he didn't like a line, he wouldn't say it. If he didn't like a scene partner, he wouldn't make eye contact. Sometimes, he wouldn't even show up until he felt like it. But wasn't just grumpiness. There was calculation behind his gruff exterior, a sense that he enjoyed keeping people off balance, testing them. He wasn't interested in being loved. He wanted respect, and he was willing to alienate half the set to get it. Up next is our final name, a woman whose elegance masked a relentless drive for perfection that turned film sets into battlefields and friendships into formalities. Katharine Hepburn, the star who refused to bow. Katharine Hepburn didn't bend, and she certainly didn't bow. She strode through Hollywood with the posture of a woman who knew exactly who she was, and exactly who she didn't care to impress. She wore trousers when other actresses wore pearls. She shunned parties, press junkets, and fanfare with open disdain. While others fought to be loved, Hepburn insisted on being left alone. On set, she demanded precision, not camaraderie. She wasn't warm. She wasn't approachable. She was focused. Every performance was war. Not with her fellow actors, but with anything that distracted from the work. She didn't tolerate unprofessionalism, and her standard for professional often exceeded what anyone else found reasonable. Directors respected her, feared her, and sometimes resented her. She interrupted rehearsals to correct people. She challenged notes with a tone that made it clear she was not asking for feedback. If something was inefficient, she said so, bluntly, and usually within earshot of the entire crew. Co-stars found her remote. She rarely socialized and made no effort to play the Hollywood charm game. For Catherine, small talk was a waste of energy. She had no patience for vanity or flattery, and even less for weakness. She kept her circle microscopic, her trust hard-won, and her emotions hidden behind a wall of New England steel. And yet, despite all of it, or perhaps because of it, she carved out one of the most respected careers in cinema history. Not by pleasing anyone, but by pleasing herself. She didn't need to be liked. She needed to be great. And if people found her cold, distant, or difficult, that was their problem. Hollywood's golden age was a time of grandeur, but also great contradiction. The stars we've just revisited weren't merely actors. They were larger-than-life figures forged in the pressure cooker of fame, power, and impossible expectations. Their brilliance lit up screens around the world, but behind that light often stood shadows of temper, pride, ego, exhaustion, and pain. Some were perfectionists who pushed too hard. Others were rebels who refused to conform. A few were simply overwhelmed by the weight of being endlessly watched and forever judged. In an industry built on illusion, it's no surprise that the human cost of stardom was often hidden behind red carpets and polished press photos. Were their manners unforgivable or simply human? That's the question time continues to ask. These were not just difficult people, they were complex individuals, shaped by unique pressures and personal histories. And while many earned reputations for being hard to work with, they also left behind legacies of unmatched artistry, courage, and unforgettable performances. As audiences, we remember their roles, but it's just as important to remember the reality behind the roles. Not to excuse, but to understand. To look at these legends not as myths, but as people. If you enjoyed this look behind the curtain of classic Hollywood, let us know in the comments. Who surprised you the most? Who would you add to the list? We'd love to hear your thoughts, the stories, the legends, and the behind-the-scenes moments that still fascinate you. And if you haven't already, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another dive into the real stories behind the silver screen. There's plenty more to uncover, and the drama is far from over. Thanks for watching. Until next time, keep your lights low and your minds open.